What's happening, everybody? You are flying with the pilot, with the conservative felon today. So, welcome to the channel. If you've never been here before, please hit the subscribe button, hit the notification bell, hit the thumbs up bell. Welcome back to the channel if you've been here. And if you've never been, if you've never been here before, thank you for tuning in. I served 17 straight years in the New York prison system. And it's not something to brag about, not something to boast about. I'm not one of those guys that sits on the channel and claims to be a shot caller like I was running the prison and all that nonsense. What I'm here to tell you is what it's like to be in prison emotionally, mentally, spiritually. And today we're specifically going to talk about why men hold on to hope when they're incarcerated and why they should always hold on to hope when they're incarcerated. It's pretty easy to give up. It's pretty easy to not see light at the end of the tunnel. When I was sentenced to 12 and a half to 25 years, it was very hard for me to see light at the end of the tunnel. And I didn't even have a life sentence. I said to myself, how am I going to do 15, 20, 25 years in prison? I really feared that I was going to end up taking my own life. I really feared that I would be forced into a position where I would have to take someone else's life and then get time added to my sentence. I feared that I would endure medical issues, that I would get sick, and the prison wouldn't take care of me properly, and then I would never make it out. So there were many reasons that made it difficult to find the hope to hold on to. And could you imagine how hard it is for someone who's sentenced to 100 years, someone who is sentenced to life without parole, someone who is sentenced to 50 years to life and they're 40 years old already? How does a person like that maintain hope? Right? And it's a question that I get a lot in the comments. People think that they say, oh, I would give up. There was no way I'd be able to make it. I hear that all the time. There's no way I'd be able to do life in prison and spend the rest of my life in there. And I have to tell you that a lot of the guys that are sentenced to life in prison, the reason they go on, there's different reasons that they go on. Some people hold on for themselves. Some people hold on for their families. They don't want to leave their family, their children, their loved ones. But a lot of them have hope that one day they're going to get out of there. I remember in the movie Shawshank Redemption, Morgan Freeman spoke a lot about hope. Or it was the guy that was speaking to Morgan Freeman about hope. Hope is a big thing. So how does someone hold on to that when he has 100 years to serve or life without parole? And I know many of you wonder how you would be able to do it. So I'm going to give you a couple of examples of why it is important to hold on to hope. Real examples that I witnessed, that I was a part of. And we'll start with my friend Haval. Haval was a Dominican man that I was in prison with. And Haval had 50 years to life. He was sentenced to 50 years to life. And he was already about 30 years old, which meant that he would not see the parole board and even be eligible for release until he was 80 years old. And the chances are that he's going to make it to 80 years old in prison with the lack of medical care, the terrible food that they serve you. The chance that you're going to make it to 80 is rough. Many guys do it, but it's hard. And then he had life. He had 50 years to life. So he would see the parole board when he was 80. That doesn't mean they were going to release him, right? And so when I met Haval, Haval had about 20 years in prison already. He had a long time in prison. So he still had 30 years to his parole board. And he was sentenced under something called the Rockefeller law, which was Governor Rockefeller in the state of New York passed the law that if you were caught with more than 3 ounces of cocaine or 3 ounces of a Class A narcotic, that you would get a mandatory life sentence. Okay, that was the law, the Rockefeller law, that if you were caught with more than 3 ounces of a Class A narcotic, you would be sentenced to mandatory life in prison. And so Haval was caught with several kilos of cocaine, more than several kilos. He was caught with a lot of kilos. He was a drug dealer. And so he was sentenced to 50 years to life for that crime. And he served 20 years. So that means for 20 years, he had to live in the prison system knowing that he was probably never going to get out. He had to live in the prison system knowing after he served 1 year, he had 49 years to go. After he served 2 years, he had 48 more years to go just to get to the parole board. And then after he served 20 years, he still had 30 years until he was even eligible for parole. So how does that guy hold on to hope? Right? They used to tell me, yo, Fish, you're a short time, and don't worry, just take it day by day. You're going to get through it day by day. Every day you're a day closer to going home. Just stay focused, educate yourself. Don't get in any trouble, And it was those words that kept me going and kept me going. But I had that light at the end of the trouble, at the end of the tunnel. Someone like Haval didn't really have that light, but he held on to the hope anyway. And then one day, after he's got 20 years in prison, the governing body of New York State, the legislature, starts talking about reversing the Rockefeller law because they feel that it was unjust. They feel because drug possession is a nonviolent crime, that it wasn't proper to sentence men to life in prison for a nonviolent crime. Society basically knew that. But the government at that time, Rockefeller, was being extremely tough on drugs, right? And so it takes 20 to 30 years for them to overturn that law. And they did overturn the law. They reversed the Rockefeller law. And when they reversed the Rockefeller law, what that did was everyone that was sentenced under the Rockefeller law, they didn't just reverse it and stop doing it, which they did. They had a vote in the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court changed the law, and they said we are no longer going to sentence people to life under the Rockefeller law. It doesn't exist anymore, right? But now all the people that was sentenced under it, they were what they call grandfathered in. We have to go back and do and rewrite the injustice that we did to them, right? And so they didn't just. There were thousands of men that were sentenced under the Rockefeller law. And so one day we're sitting on the company, and the legal mailman comes down. He's delivering the legal mail, and he delivers Haval a letter, but Haval can't read great English. He's a Dominican brother, can't read great English. So he gives me the letter and he says, "Yo, Fish, what they say? What's it say in this letter?" And so I read the letter, which is from the state of New York, from the court system, and it says that they revised the Rockefeller law, and that they're going to bring Haval back into court. They're going to transfer him back into court, and they're going to resentence him. They're going to take the life off the back of the sentence. That's what the law meant, that they're going to remove life off of the sentence, right? But then he still has 50 years to deal with because he had 50 to life. So they're going to remove the life. But even if you have 50 years, that's still like a life sentence. So he gets this letter in the mail saying that they're going to bring him back to court to resentence him and take life off. And then there's a form attached, right? And it says that if he signs the form, right, that they can sentence him without being present, that they could change the sentence without being present. Oh, first he gets the letter saying they're going to bring him back. Then 2 days later, he gets another letter saying, listen, we don't actually have to bring you back. If you sign this form and you mail it into the courts, we'll resentence you without you even being present, if you agree to that. If you agree to it, we'll resentence you without being present. And if you don't agree to it, then we're going to bring you back to court and we'll resentence you in person. So he says, he asked me, what do you think I should do? I said, let them resentence you, dude. I said, whether you're there or not there, it's going to be the same sentence. So just let them resentence you. That was my opinion. I said, but you do whatever you want. And so he signs the form and he mails it in. About 30 days later, he gets another letter. And it says, we have resentenced you. And we took the life off of your sentence. And we took the 50 years. And we made it 20 years. So in other words, he was sentenced to 20 years. But he already had 20 years served. That meant he was time served. That meant he was going to be released. And when he gave me the letter to read it to him, and I read it, I had to read it a couple of times. And I said, Haval, you got time served. You're going home within 30 days. Time served. And the tears that were falling from this guy's eyes, the this tough, huge, massive drug former drug dealer, former drug kingpin, went from having 50 years to life to time served like that. And the hope that he had always held on to became reality at that moment. He had hoped something would happen to change the destiny that was set forth in front of him. And Haval went home. He went home to New York City with time served from 50 years to life in prison. And when that Rockefeller law was changed, there was about, I think, 1,900 people. I'm not exact sure on the number, but there was around 2,000 prisoners in the New York prison system that were sentenced under the Rockefeller law. And when it got revised, a large majority of them were just released back into society. And under those circumstances, I personally, whether I was a former prisoner or whether I was a normal citizen on the street, would not have a problem with that because, as I said previously, what they were sentenced for was a nonviolent crime. Yes, there is violence centered around drug dealing. Yes, there is violence. It causes violence, but that's a different topic. The crime that they were charged with was possession or sale of narcotics, which was nonviolent. It's not like shooting someone or blowing someone away or setting someone on fire or kidnapping someone. It was drug possession. And I don't believe that it warranted life in prison, and New York State fell under that impression as well, and they didn't believe it was warranted, and that's why they overturned the law. It just took them 30 years to do it. And so I watched from Attica prison that I was in at the time. There were about 200 or 300 men in Attica prison that were sentenced under the Rockefeller law that I just watched go home within 30 days, and none of them ever thought they were going to go home. None of them, well, I shouldn't say none of them, maybe some of them believed it, but most of them never thought they thought they were going to die in the New York prison system because they possessed drugs, you know, which is a very, very unfortunate thing to go into prison for, to serve life for, when the truth is that most of a large percentage of people in government are importing drugs. Why do you think when we go to war in Afghanistan, all of a sudden there's a massive, massive heroin epidemic in the United States? When Afghanistan is the heroin capital of the world. Why do you think when we went into Vietnam, the second biggest heroin grower, manufacturer of heroin. Why do you think when we went into Vietnam, all of a sudden there was a heroin epidemic inside of the United States? A lot of the politicians were involved in bringing those drugs overseas into America. Well, you think they're different because they wear a suit and tie? We're not even going to get into that. That's a whole nother video, right? Hope. If you have a loved one in prison and he's serving life in prison, hold on to the hope. You never know what's going to happen. If it takes 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, or in Haval's case, 20 years, you have to hold on to the hope because there is a chance. There's always a chance that something can change and the person may not die in there. The reality is sometimes they do. That's a reality too. And I like to really express that reality. And because I want you to know that if you do go into prison and you do get sentenced to life, there is also a chance, a large majority, that you may never make it out alive. So be careful what you do. They have no problem with letting you die in there. They have no problem with keeping you for the rest of your life. What I was speaking about with that law being overturned is a real exception to the rule. It happens a small percentage of the time, but it does happen. And that's why people hold on to hope. I'm wrapping this up for today. You guys be good. I'll make another video soon. All my best. Thank you for flying with the captain, conservative felon. I'm out of here, guys. Peace.